So we'd like to bring up Dr. Keith Stallworth from the Black Caucus Foundation. You all know the great job he did in the state legislature, and a good friend of the NAACP. Come on up.
Thank you, Pastor. And I've asked John to stay. First, Pastor, thank you for inviting me. Council Hollowell, my other two bosses are here, Chairman Durhall, and my mother, Representative Stallworth. A couple of things, Chancellor, before you leave. I really hope that you will advocate to the executive office what you need the same way you advocate that you need buy-in from Detroit for your program. One of the things that we do as a policy organization is try to look at where there are gaps. As an organization, we certainly can't support a separate system for black children that's underfunded. Under the best case scenario, you probably are $202 short in your per pupil foundation allowance. Under the worst case scenario, you're probably $1,000, maybe $1,200 short. There was not a specific line item to address appropriations for you in the imbalance. We believe it is unreasonable that a new program would be responsible for operating debt. We believe it's unreasonable to expect for schools to pay that operating debt, with the exception of charters in Detroit. They aren't required to pay. And so I share with Chairman Durhall, although there was this discussion about increasing the base foundation allowance, which would come to all districts, there was also an earmarked reduction for you of about $8 million in the supplemental bill. The reason that's significant is that they go back on the 16th. Obviously, we're concerned because as one of the providers of prevention programs in schools, we believe that there has to be an alternative to the 28,000 student suspensions that were in DPS in 2010. You can't suspend students, that number of students from school, and expect a good academic outcome. So yes, Mother Moore. And let me say this too. Mother Moore has education, agitation, and advocacy. So you're getting that. But we expect for you to advocate to the governor the same way you're advocating for buy-in here. It can't work if you could be great, but the underfunding creates a tremendous obstacle for you. And it is important for the governor to know that we know you underfunded. We know you underfunded. We know it. We know it. I've shared this with the chairman. I mean, it is difficult when you are fighting so many things at the same time. But in the Detroit community, it's all the same. Just before I got here, and the reason I was late, we are underfunded. There's no money in the budget for the health department, City of Detroit. But what's significant about that, all of the money that addresses substance abuse treatment and recovery is federal block grant money. So why are we arguing over it? We know that money can't be touched, can't be used for anything else. Why are you going to address this issue in a way? Not you, but this is what Reverend was talking about. You know when you were at Mumford what I said. Can't trust you. It has nothing to do with you. It has something to do with where we are. So what I'm going to encourage you to do, and Reverend, what I would ask that the Alliance do, is make it very clear that we understand that there is a per pupil variance that makes the MEAA the poorest financed school district in the state. Now that is contrary to the philosophy of helping it, of him coming in and doing something remarkable. When we all agree, this is just common sense. If you expect for them to achieve individualized learning, provide behavioral supports for students, in-school suspension programs, all the things that we know are critical to the success of students that are challenged, why would you give them less than even what you give DPS? It doesn't make any sense. So that we can't believe it is a genuine conversation to say they want you to be successful, and they are earnestly putting those issues on the table. So, Reverend, I before he left, that charge, if you could embrace that charge, that he delivered that message. You need buy-in. You need buy-in for your program to be successful. You can't get buy-in and Detroiters know you don't have the resources to even do the job. Can't do it. Does that make sense?
I think you articulated it.
And Mr. Williams has, my board meets Thursday. We have a resolution that we've drafted that I think he will distribute that specifically speaks to the per pupil funding statewide, the allocations that are there for the general student population versus the special ed population, and what we believe certainly needs to be addressed as a funding inequity. And as Mother Moore said, I mean, these experiments, we haven't quite got the experiment right with emergency management in DPS. So to be starting a new experiment, obviously Detroiters don't feel good about that. I was asked by Mr. Williams to come and speak also about the International Bridge crossing. And as Reverend Anthony has said, this has been a very, very tough process to get the governor's team to address issues that have real economic impact for Detroit residents. And as Sherry indicated with the last school bond proposal, and this is the irony, it probably was 2 or 3 years ago we were right here, and Robert Bob said of the 10,000, 11,000 jobs that would be created out of Proposal S, there would be a preference for Detroit residents in that process. Well, we all know that the residency requirement that we all hoped would be in the project labor agreement requiring a 6-month residency for Detroiters, we all know that at the end of the day was reduced down to 45 days. And because that agreement was ratified in January, tradesmen from across the state and out of state were able to get addresses in Detroit prior to June, and they principally were the only ones working on Martin Luther King. So we were left out of the process. You see signs and billboards across the metro area cropping up, saying the public bridge, 10,000 jobs, and we should all support it. But in the context of that, and our chamber president, Ken Harris, is here today. He's our spokesperson on this issue. The issue is really, how do you ensure, if Detroit is in financial distress, how do you ensure this economic opportunity creates an opportunity for a city that desperately needs it? The interesting thing about the position the governor finds himself in is that the Federal Highway Administration gave Michigan a waiver in 2011 for M39 to use a best value weighting system for the Southfield Freeway. And the significance of that is that for the first time, price was not the determining factor. Price was not the determining factor. The prime contractor who was able to develop a proposal that showed that there would be an economic value for the city received a weighted award for the bid. In that instance, the winning contractor had a proposal that if you were a skilled craftsman that lived in zip codes contiguous to the Southfield Freeway, you would receive the first opportunity to be hired. In addition, all of the fueling, all of the clothing needs for craftsmen were purchased, if available, from zip codes contiguous. Lunch cards were given out to workers on the freeway so they could use lunch vouchers at restaurants that were contiguous to the freeway. An economic return where the impact is. Right. The interesting thing is, it's the Federal Highway Administration that did this. It's not the governor, not MDOT, the Federal Highway Administration. And what we're saying is that the concept of using a best value system should be in the supply chain for any public contract as long as we're in this financial distress. There shouldn't be anything wrong with using locally headquartered businesses. There shouldn't be anything wrong with trying to determine how to drive revenue into local communities. There shouldn't be anything wrong for giving weighted factors to contractors who agree to employ and train local residents. If it's good enough for the Federal Highway Administration, our question is, why wouldn't it be good enough for the International Trade Crossing? We're asking allies to support this effort, any of the policy issues, and I want to be clear on this. Sometimes we are so vested in fighting the philosophy behind a policy that we miss the money. We got to do both. We have to deal with those issues that represent an infringement on our constitutional rights, but at the same time, we have to be able to fight every struggle vertically. The process is still going to move. And so if we don't make a point to ensure that we have access and opportunity, and there's some reciprocity economically, whether we win the philosophical battle doesn't matter. We still broke, poor, and raggedy. We've got to figure out how we can leverage what we know to ensure that there is an economic opportunity, whether this is project manager who will have downtown, the supply chain itself. The supply chain itself should have as a mandate the desire to employ and hire local companies and residents. I've attached some information that we've provided. We asked the governor in no uncertain terms to create an urban policy agenda. That is a slow process, and I want you to be clear on this. Some things can be done. You can take some of the pension fund money and move it to a black money manager and give them the charge of figuring out how to create investment opportunities in Detroit. How do I know some things can be done? Because when I was marketing director of the Michigan Lottery, if you bought $100, we gave you free 100 lottery tickets if you put a deposit in First Independence National Bank. Let me say it again. If you bought if you wanted lottery tickets, you put $100 in First Independence National Bank in a savings account, we gave you 100 free lottery tickets. Right. It can be done, but it can't be done if nobody's trying to figure out how to do it. And so all it takes is a will to press forward. I think it's a counselor, I don't know how many other things that you would like for me to share in regards to this. I do also want to say that I would encourage you to invite to your next Allies meeting the Canadian Aboriginal Minority Supplier Council. And it's very important for you to know that there are local residents and persons of color on the other side of the bridge that have the same issues that we have. They're trying to figure out, well, this is going on. The federal government is advancing the U.S. money. How are we going to participate in this process? And they have the same access issues in Canada that we have in the States.
What was the name of that? Canadian Aboriginal?
Canadian and Aboriginal Minority Supplier Council, 416-941-0004.